What's up, everybody? Welcome to the channel. Going to talk some Cardinals baseball here with my good buddy Brenden Schaeffer of KMOV and, of course, The Big Show on KTGR. Brenden, fresh off his trip to Jupiter, Florida and Cardinal spring training. Brenden, how you doing, man?
Oh, doing well, Charlie. The Charlie Marlow Show. That is big-time billing, so excited to be with you here today.
All right, well, let's start it like this. I have so much to talk with you about in terms of Cardinal spring training. How about we start like this? What's the most interesting thing that you saw or you heard from a player when you were down there?
The most interesting thing for me was Wilson Contreras, I think, is kind of the star of the show down in spring camp right now because he's really the only new guy the Cardinals brought in of any significance. He's replacing Yadier Molina, so that's a big deal. But it's also like the fact that he wanted to be in St. Louis, and people are excited about him for good reason. I thought it was really interesting. This was actually something that was relayed to me from a Cardinals fan who was excitedly showing me their pictures of Wilson Contreras and all the Cardinals pictures that they got that day, who said, yeah, there was another fan down there who said they wanted to send a picture of Contreras to their buddy who's a Cubs fan, and it's going to make that guy cry. And Wilson Contreras evidently said, yeah, well, they're going to be crying for a long time. So I like that he's got a little bit of a competitive edge to him, a fire to him, that immediately I think he's already going to be using that to see how he can hurt the Cubs, whereas in the past it was always the Cardinals that were on the wrong end of those things. The Cardinals have talked about, like, this is a guy who we knew when he was playing against us that he did things intentionally to make us not like him. Now he's on the red side of the rivalry, which I think is going to be a lot of fun this summer when the Cardinals and Cubs start matching up. That was pretty fun and interesting to me from spring training camp.
All right, I like that you started there. So how about, because you're talking about Wilson Contreras, did it feel weird that this was the first camp in almost 2 decades without Yadier Molina? And I think last year we focused on Albert and Yadi, but let's be real, Albert wasn't around for 10 years. So did it feel kind of different with just the fact that the persona and the huge personality of Yadier Molina is no longer there?
Honestly, it didn't feel too incredibly different. Like, you do still have Adam Wainwright, so he's got that sort of legacy aspect attached to him. And then that first day that we were down there when it was Wilson Contreras and media folks were trying to get him coming out of the clubhouse and he snuck out the side door, it was just like Yachty was still here. So, I think Wilson Contreras is going to fit in really well. And you also got to realize there are other veterans on this team, too, that sort of set the tone for what the Cardinals like to do. I think guys like Goldie and Arenado, it's not like they're looking at this as, oh, now I have to step into the leadership role. I think they were already doing some of those things. And that's sort of the culture that's been established by guys like Yadi and Albert before him. And so I feel like it wasn't all that different to see what Cardinals camp is like, because you do still have that veteran presence there to sort of set the tone.
All right, I'm going to follow your lead here in this interview. So you mentioned Adam Wainwright. So first of all, we can go several ways with this one as well. Do you actually think this is Waino's final season? I'm just wondering if he has a really good year and he's knocking on the door for the Baseball Hall of Fame and maybe needs one more season, could he come back? Also, World Baseball Classic, are you worried at all that you got competitive innings with adrenaline early on? And then I guess the most important thing for Cardinals fans, can he be the Adam Wainwright of the first 5 months and not that last month? So there's 3 questions in one for you.
Yeah, let's see how I tackle all that. So do I think it's his last year for real? Like, I do, but I also, it is kind of weird, right? Like the fact that he didn't really want to talk about it and he's sort of been pressed into saying it's his last year. You could always go back on that later if you needed to. And I think the Hall of Fame angle is actually a pretty interesting one, because if you sit down and look at his numbers, it's not as far-fetched as people might think. If you add one really strong year to that a career where he missed a couple of years due to injury in his prime too, he still has put up some pretty impressive numbers. You also have that legacy aspect with Yadier Molina. Most people think Yadi's going to be a Hall of Famer, maybe not the first ballot, but he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. And they've got that record where they had the most starts by a battery in MLB history. So you add that, you add the World Championships. Waino's got a pretty compelling case. And so adding another year to that, like, I think if he's knocking on the door of maybe that Cardinals record, he said he wanted to pass Jesse Haynes for second all time in wins. He's not catching Bob Gibson, but if he gets to number 2, does that compel him? I think it's interesting. Probably it's his last year, but I guess it's not impossible. You hear enough rumblings about, you never know, Hall of Fame might matter, then maybe it does matter. And we could see Waino have a 2024 if 2023 goes well. Now, can 2023 go well was another part of your question. I think yes to that as well, just because he seems to have figured out the reason that the last month of the season was bad. I tend to believe Adam Wainwright when he says, yep, there were some things I wasn't really paying close attention to in my video work, that once I diagnosed the problem with my stride length and some things that had gotten out of whack, I was able to fix it. And really, if you think about his durability, he's been a much more durable pitcher over the last, 4 or 5 years or so, since he sort of had that come to Jesus moment of, is my career going to be able to extend, or do I have to change some things to make that happen? He's made those changes, and for the most part, has been much more durable. So I think a good season would be in store for Adam Wainwright. And Charlie, I got 2 out of 3. There was a third aspect of Wainwright that has slipped my mind. What else did you want to know?
Not just Wainwright, but World Baseball Classic.
Right.
And I don't want to say I don't care about the position players going, but I just think it's different. Position players, you're taking at bats in spring, you're taking ABs, World Baseball Classic. I just worry about the adrenaline of March innings that matter for some older guys like a Wainwright and a Miles Michaelis with a pitching staff that already has some injury concerns. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it does. You could look at every guy in the Cardinals rotation and make a case for why that guy might not make it through the year. Like, I guess Jordan Montgomery is the one guy that we could say, all right, well, he's been relatively durable, but he's kind of new to the Cardinals, so you don't really know what he's all about. Yeah, everybody else, there are at least some question marks, and 2 of those guys are pitching in the World Baseball Classic for Team USA. Michaelis has had his injury issues over the past few years, but last year was pretty durable, and so I guess you're just hoping that he's through the storm on some of those things and can be all right. Wainwright, similar story. I guess it is a little bit concerning, especially for Wainwright in his situation going into everything we just talked about. Is it his last season? Is he making a case for Hall of Fame? Like, pitching for his country matters a lot to Adam Wainwright too, and so that's why you see him doing this. But everything else would point to maybe don't have that be the thing you do with your spring training this year. But I guess it's just a matter of you're trusting these veterans to know their bodies and to know when maybe maybe would need to ease off the gas in that case. But I would say, like, if you're looking at it from John Mozeliak's perspective, he wasn't going to tell anybody not to go. He even said Wilson Contreras, we weren't telling him whether he could go or not go. And you'd think it'd be really important to have him in camp, given he's got to learn all the pitchers with a new team. But the Cardinals weren't going to do that. And so I guess they're just kind of crossing their fingers a little bit to say, hopefully these guys get through this unscathed and are able to help out, not only at the beginning of the season, but this is a team that wants to be in October. So what could the impact be September, October on some of those pitchers? I think that's a fair question as well.
Okay, so sticking with the starting pitching, this is my biggest concern. And it's kind of odd because I don't want to say I'm not concerned about the regular season, but
Right.
the Cardinals are in this unique spot where the bar is so high, expectations are so high. Again, I don't want to say I don't care about the regular season because it's 162 games. It's going to be fun. It's going to be entertaining. But we're to the point with the Cardinals, especially after some recent lack of playoff success where they have to win a playoff series. So I'm actually not worried about the 2023 Cardinals starting rotation in the regular season. I think they'll be fine to get to 90-plus wins, probably win the Central. I just don't love how they match up against really good National League contenders from a starting pitching standpoint. Now, if Flaherty is a legit ace, that makes me feel a whole lot better, but I don't know if we can bank on that right now.
Yeah, I mean, the Cardinals have one guy in their prospective rotation that can do the things that Jack Flaherty can do when healthy, when he's fully right. He's the only guy with that real strikeout upside, that ability to be the kind of dynamic ace that you think about when you talk about some of those other teams in the National League picture. So, like, there's a little bit of a concern there. And I think I would add to that by saying you're probably in that best 2 out of 3 again, right? Because the Cardinals, the Central just doesn't look like it's going to be all too difficult for St. Louis to win. They made not a ton of major moves in the offseason, but they're still the best team coming back into that division. But out east and west, you've got arguably 2 teams in each division that might be better suited for a playoff series than the Cardinals. And now St. Louis, because they're likely going to be that third division winner, you then have to deal with the same thing you dealt with last season. Sure, you got to play that 2 out of 3 at Busch Stadium against the Phillies, but when one fluky thing happens to your lights out closer and suddenly it changes the course of a season, like, that sucks. And the Cardinals, with the way they're built, like, that's what they're going to have to be dealing with, is the flukishness and the randomness of a 2 out of 3 playoff series. And, like, you get into those series and it'd be nice to have some of those Jack Flahertys to feel really good about throwing up from a pitching perspective. The truth is you can win without those in maybe a 2 out of 3. But yeah, when you get into the best of 5, best of 7 series, the Cardinals, it feels like are going to be relying upon some pitchers that, like we said, we've got questions about. They're going to have to almost slug their way to wins in those series, sort of taking the route that the Phillies took getting to the World Series last year. But then again, the Phillies did have a Zach Wheeler and an Aaron Nola to lean on. So I could see that there'd be a little bit of concern in October for St. Louis.
So you're teeing me up perfectly here. You mentioned Ryan Helsley. I saw you were there for his little media scrum talking about arbitration, which is not a great process, it seems like. Not just Helsley, but Corbin Burns, obviously. You mentioned, the fluky thing with his finger. What I find funny and interesting is, so he brings up the fact that the Cardinals questioned his durability, which I get, and he was injured before last season. Now, he was great last year. Now, Brenden Schaeffer, if I know anything, you're a big fantasy baseball guy.
Right.
And I laugh when I say this because, last year I had Ryan Helsley on one of my teams. He was the greatest pitcher ever that never pitched.
Yeah.
I would joke all the time, this guy is so good, and they never used him. He had the 4-out saves, which is great. So I don't know what I'm trying to say but it's like the Cardinals almost were punishing him financially for his usage, which they dictated. Now, even though I get it because you want to keep him fresh for the playoffs, that's what's most important. They were also in control of his usage, which I found kind of funny with the way arbitration went.
Yeah, and that is a tricky deal, right? Because I think back to last summer with Helsley, and there were a lot of conversations with ONeill Marmol, and even with Helsley himself, where he said, there were maybe times in my past where I would have fought for that ball, fought to go back-to-back days, those sorts of things. I can't get into his head to say he didn't often fight for those things, but I kind of did get the sense that last year they were very careful with him, but he was sort of involved in that process too, right? But it does seem a little bit unfair to then turn around and sort of hold that against him when there's money on the line. Like the Cardinals, I think, led the charge in the way they handled Helsley last year, and by and large, it worked. The shame of it all is that it didn't work for the playoffs, but it's not because they overused him during the season. Like they were ready. ONeill Marmol, there were some very candid conversations in his office the day after that Game 1 loss where he's like, look, what we did all year was to be able to absolutely use the heck out of him this month. And then you have the weird little finger injury that prevents that from being able to happen. Like, it is a weird situation, but I think part of it was Helsley recognizing his body and saying, I want to make sure that I'm healthy too. I'm cool with what the Cardinals are doing. I just don't think at the end of the day he realized that it was maybe going to be turned around against him in those arbitration hearings, which again, he said, if the worst thing that happens to me is that I make $2 million this year to play baseball instead of $3 million, I'm going to be okay. But at the same time, like there are other pitchers in baseball, like Corbin Burns, you mentioned, who weren't that happy about the way things went. And it did probably get a little ugly where you got to have some very strong sensibilities to be able to take some of the things that the team is saying about you and you're one of their players. It's a weird deal, arbitration.
Give us your take on Flaherty. What do you think his season will look like? I guess we're assuming health. Do you think he can be, I don't even want to say that 2019 second half Flaherty, maybe more that, how about the 2021 first half, who was still pretty dang good before he was hurt? Just a solid number one type starter. Can he be that?
Yeah, he definitely can be that. And I like that you brought up 2021 as well, because I think Flaherty kind of he's over hearing about the second half of 2019. Can we get that Flaherty back? Like in his mind, it's just, I'm Jack Flaherty, and when I am healthy, those are the types of things I'm going to do. And you're right. At the beginning of 2021, he was basically doing those things. But sure, it's kind of been few and far between since that 2019 run that he had. And so that's why a lot of people harken back to it. I don't know. I have a good feeling about Flaherty this season, which maybe that's the kiss of death. But like, he came into camp, he looks healthy, he looks strong. He's impressive when you watch him throw. And they really weren't even ramped up to the full extent when I was down there. So of all the guys in the rotation, and again, it's kind of like shooting craps. You don't exactly know what you're going to get with some of these guys when you get into the season. But I feel like all the preparation and the rehabbing that Flaherty has had to do over the past couple of seasons, I think it's put him into a good spot where he's feeling like himself coming into camp. And so it kind of ebbs and flows with pitchers, right? Guys will tend to have a year or two where it just doesn't feel right. Michael has had that stretch, and then look, he came out on the other side of it. I think this year could be that for Jack Flaherty. So I don't know. You always worry because, like I said, they don't have a way to replicate what he can do. He's the one guy who has that ceiling in their rotation. but I kind of feel like he's going to be able to stay on the field and have that kind of year this year. If I had to bet on it, that's what I'm kind of feeling for Jack Flaherty, a pretty productive season that kind of makes everything else slot in very appropriately for the Cardinals pitching staff.
Anybody else on the pitching side that popped, whether you're watching them throwing the pens, or also that maybe Yadier Molina or John Mozeliak are talking about? I've noticed in past years, John Mozeliak, I don't even want to say he'll tip his hand because he's pretty honest. A couple years back, he kind of foreshadowed Jordan Hicks.
Right.
He kind of foreshadowed Ryan Helsley saying, hey, we're pretty high on these guys. I don't know if it's Schaeffer or who else, anybody like that's being talked about a lot this year.
There's a name. I'll give you a name. And not to take away from Schaeffer, because I think Gordon Schaeffer, who was the team's minor league pitcher of the year at AA last season, throughout the whole minor league organization, he won that award. But I'm going to focus on his teammate, Michael McGreevy, who was a first-round pick, I want to say 2021. He was their first rounder. And I was impressed watching him throw when I was down at camp and talking to him as well. The Cardinals kind of have Schaeffer and McGreevy sort of skipping through the system together. They're at the same level. They rise up to AA last year. We'll see what ends up happening for both of them this season. But John Mozeliak, you mentioned it, the sort of tipping of his hand back at winter warmup. He mentioned both of those guys along with Jordan Walker as like prospects that could help us sooner rather than later. And we all kind of know Jordan Walker is coming. And so the fact that he put those other two pitchers in the same sentence with Jordan Walker, I think is rather significant. And then watching McGreevy throw, it's like, okay, the reason they drafted this guy was they liked his command. They thought he could be a quick riser through the minor league system. And the question was sort of, would he have the velocity to really be that type of arm in your rotation? He was ticking up evidently to like 95, 96 this spring, I was seeing. So if that guy has been able to add some velocity, I think he's got the makeup to be pretty good. I'm kind of keeping my eye on him, not necessarily as a guy in Michael McGreevy that the Cardinals are going to bring up right away to begin the season. But do I think Michael McGreevy will pitch in St. Louis and could help this team in 2023? My answer to that would be yes.
So how about John Mozeliak, before we get to the offensive side of the ball? What did you think of that press conference where he gets the extension? And I thought it was kind of odd entering the spring that it got to that point. And I don't know, from listening and watching his comments, it didn't seem like it was necessarily a foregone conclusion that he'd get the extension in terms of what he wants to do next. He's obviously now setting up the succession plan for the future. It seems like this could be the last contract for John Mozeliak. So what did you make of his comments at that press conference?
I would honestly even go a step further than to say this could be his last contract. I think before the end of the contract, which runs through 2025, I don't know which year it would take place, if it would be next year or the following season, but I would make the case that Mozeliak will kind of step back in terms of some day-to-day responsibilities. And to a lot of people, that may not matter because he'll still have his fingerprints on everything. But like when I think about what we do, Charlie, and it's like you're going to games, you're talking to John Mozeliak a lot of times before the first home game of a series, like media responsibilities. I think you could maybe see some of those things really start to shift elsewhere. They talked about doing that around 2020 when Gersh was elevated to GM and they said, yeah, we're going to really kind of give him more opportunities. And then COVID happened and you sort of had to have John Mozeliak out front and center. And to me, that maybe pushed back a little bit of the plans that they had to sort of have that succession take place. So I just kind of wonder if the responsibilities get moved around even before the end of the 2025 contract, for John Mozeliak to sort of have that succession plan in place. I did think it was interesting the way they talked about it coming into the beginning of this new contract to say, yeah, this is sort of going to be how we delve up some responsibilities. And that those changes, I think, could potentially happen 2024, 2025 before this contract even expires. You got to realize Mozeliak has been with the organization for a long time. By the end of the deal, it will have been like 30 years that he will have been a Cardinals employee. And so it makes sense that he would want to do something else, want to move on eventually. But I think with this contract, they have done something that both sides will feel the organization is set up really well for the future. They can see through a couple of the projects that they're working on, the Roger Dean renovation down in Jupiter, and then see like the next crop of players like a Jordan Walker make it to the major leagues and kind of set everybody up as Mozeliak maybe makes his exit in a few years.
Yeah, I appreciate Adam Wainwright's comments about the Roger Dean complex saying, I love it here, but you don't want to share the same shower heads that Ty Cobb used to use, whatever it was. That was a pretty good line.
That was a very good line by Wainwright. He's full of those, but that was good. And I mean, you kind of look in the in the clubhouse and things like that. There's nothing fancy about it. And players nowadays, you go to some other places and there are little bells and whistles that players I think would appreciate. So yeah, they're going to get that stuff done. Waino just won't be around, we don't think, to enjoy it anymore.
All right, let's talk some offense here, which to me is not a huge concern. I think it seems like for fans, and I'm maybe judging this based on my YouTube comments, a lot of people are worried about the offense. I'm not. I understand it, though. I think it's because so much of the lack of playoff success in these small sample size series, whether it's Dodgers a couple years ago or against the Phillies, has been a lack of offense. But the Cardinals were pretty dang good, like top 3 National League in the offensive categories that matter. And to me, I don't worry about the infield. Outfielders, to me, you have this bucket of guys. There's like 5 or 6 of them. I can't tell you who's going to be good, or who's going to stay healthy, but I have a lot of confidence that 3 or 4 of them will, and that's enough for them to be a good offense.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. The way they've exited the postseason the last number of times is frustrating. I mean, you could even go back to the Padres series in 2020, that Game 3 they didn't score. And when they were eventually ousted in the LCS against the Nationals in 19, they had advanced to the LCS. That was good, but the offense just didn't really come through in that series either. And so I understand that concern. But like when you look at it, you go, okay, you had 2 of the top 3 MVP guys in the NL in your lineup, and those guys are coming back. That's good. You've replaced what, no offense to Yadi, was a black hole at the catcher position offensively last year. I mean, it was bad. And you replace that with Wilson Contreras, a guy that you think can probably OPS 800, get you 20 dingers. They'll probably bat him 5th. I think that'll be pretty good. Okay, Lars Newbar is like the potential breakout star. Everybody's waiting to see what he's going to do next. And his numbers last year, if you take out the first couple of months when he was going back and forth to AAA and just wasn't getting to play, he was pretty good last year already. So you've got that, and then you've got the OBP guys like a Brendan Donovan, a Tommy Edman that are going to mix in. What do they do with DH? I think that's sort of the question to me, because last year it was like Nolan Gorman, we don't want him to be a DH. We want him to play. And then he wasn't playing because he wasn't hitting consistently. And so for all the talk of left-handed power bat, they didn't go out and get somebody because, as Mo said at winter warm-up, maybe those guys who were in that role couldn't really picture themselves with the Cardinals because they say, well, you've got guys like that. I don't really know if I'm going to get a chance to play. The Cardinals might have to actually commit to a guy like Gorman. If they weren't going to trade him this offseason, which I thought they might to try and fill some of their needs, they could say, all right, Gorman, you're going to play, and we're not going to take you out of the lineup when you go through a slump, because we think at the end of the day, you'll hit those 25, 30 home runs if we give you the chance to do it. So I think some of those decisions are going to have to be that moment for the Cardinals where they have to make those choices of what they want to do there. I agree with you, though, about the positions you mentioned in the outfield in particular. Like, is ONeill going to stay healthy and be good? We don't know. I'm kind of high on Lars Newbar. That wasn't a guy that I would have traded, and the Cardinals obviously felt the same way. And then you got to remember, too, Jordan Walker could end up in that outfield mixture. And I'm not saying he's going to come be the MVP as a rookie, but he could be Rookie of the Year. Like, he has that ability. There's a learning curve and a growing curve for such a young player. But if you added that guy to a group that can stay relatively healthy, I do think the offense can be in good shape.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk about Walker. And every year there's the new bright, shiny object, and Jordan Walker is a huge prospect, not just for the Cardinals, but all of baseball. But I think you bring up a great point with Nolan Gorman, because last year when he's hitting all these bombs at AAA, everybody's saying, bring him up, bring him up. He comes up. He's actually pretty dang good. He's above league average as a rookie. I know he got sent down, had a big hit in the postseason, still hit, 14 homers, whatever it was for the Cardinals, a bunch total. And, I mean, this dude could hit 28 home runs this year, and we kind of have, I don't want to say forgotten about him, but it's like, hey, could we trade him this offseason? We haven't even really seen what he can do at all for a full season yet.
Yeah, and like the trade thing was back when it was like you could end up going for a Brian Reynolds, right, with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Like, I was thinking, okay, that's a guy that you know what he is. And so if you are able to, and another guy who does hit left-handed. So you're like, okay, if that's something you're going to do, I could see trading Gorman in that sort of deal. Or maybe if you wanted to get a superstar catcher, but you end up going for Contreras in free agency. But otherwise, yeah, like, I just think the thing is the Cardinals do have to commit to playing Nolan Gorman if they're going to do it. And I think this year they're going to be willing to put him in DH more than they were last year with him as a rookie. And the other part of what happened to him down the stretch, it was kind of a perfect storm where he was struggling at the plate, wasn't getting the consistent at-bats, which then made him struggle more. And then this guy, Albert Pujols, was chasing 700, and turns out didn't matter if it's a lefty or a righty on the mound. They're going to DH him every single day. I sort of asked Ollie a question this spring about like you guys were going to be strategic with the DH, and then you just played Albert. Like, good strategy, makes sense. But I think maybe that's where Gorman could also fit in. And the other part of this is, like, don't forget about him, because I don't think the Cardinals are. This spring, Ollie Marmol was asked, like, who showed up to camp and just physically looked different or looked really good to you? And the name that Ollie Marmol said was Nolan Gorman. He said he looks really impressive physically, made some changes in the offseason to get himself ready. So, like, there is a world in which he does that. He has that 28 home run season, and yeah, he's going to strike out a bunch. Like, it happens in Major League Baseball these days that guys strike out. But with Gorman, as long as you're getting the payoff of the power to counteract the strikeouts, I just hope to see the Cardinals willing to make that trade-off instead of going, he's not really hitting. It's going to be Brendan Donovan or, whoever else it ends up being. If they want to trust Nolan Gorman, I think they got to commit to doing it.
And speaking of specimens, Jordan Walker, whatever he is, 6'5", 220, it looks like eventually he's going to be able to carry 240 in good weight. I mean, that dude, he's a big dude, strong guy. I know we always joke around, like, the ball sounds different coming off the bat of certain players, but man, like, he's had such a meteoric rise. Cardinal fans can't wait to see him. I mean, what do you think the chances are that he actually breaks camp? I think he's going to play for the Cardinals in 2023. I think everybody agrees with that. But what are the chances he breaks camp with the team, you think?
I think he would need to have like an Albert Pujols 2001 type of spring training, which he's going to have the chance to do, by the way. With all the guys going to the World Baseball Classic, I think they're going to throw him out there a lot and give him playing time in Grapefruit League. So if he's hitting like crazy and like holding his own against Major League caliber pitching, I think you could see him on the team. If I had to bet on it, I'd bet against it, though. Not really because of anything Jordan Walker I'm expecting to do wrong or to not thrive with this spring, but like I think it's going to be so over the top to be able to get the Cardinals, who are historically all about that 40-man and about keeping those guys. And like, look at the outfield and the number of guys they've got, unless a number of guys of the Dylan Carlson, ONeill, Newbar, there's Alec Burleson, there are other names I'm forgetting. Unless a couple of those guys get injured, where you maybe just are afforded the opportunity to stash them on the injured list and it doesn't count against your roster. Like, I think it's going to be hard for Walker to crack his way in. But I do think, like, by early in the season, especially if he goes to AAA and it's looking right down, because remember, he's never played in AAA really all that much. I don't even know if he went up there at all last year. So he didn't even get like the Dylan Carlson when he was coming up. They gave him a month at Memphis in September and it looked good. So they're like, okay, we can trust this. He hasn't even played there. So for Walker, I think it can go really well. I think there's a chance he makes the team, but it's almost got to be like a historic spring to get the Cardinals to go, okay, forget all that stuff that we normally do with like tinkering with rosters. We're just going to bring him up and play him every day because he is that good. Outfield defense is the other thing, though, that we got to keep in mind. He just started being an outfielder July 31 of last year when they traded Bader to the Yankees. So there's probably a work in progress situation there that could also factor in. But for me, who cares? Like, if the bat is the bat, you need to bring him up, but it'll probably be a little bit later in the summer if I had to guess.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the Cardinals are boringly good every year, but they're also boringly predictable in how they do business. I mean, John Mozeliak, again, we got 15 years, whatever it is, worth of data of how he likes to run his team. And you just know they're going to give the ONeill, Carlson, Newbar trio at least the first opportunity, and in my opinion, a ton of opportunities to fail before they go to the next man up. And the next man up could be Burleson. And then after that, it's somebody like Jordan Walker, just because it seems more Cardinals-like to start him at AAA.
It does, but the one thing I'll say about that is like the incumbents are getting a lot of attention because Ollie Marmol hasn't really praised them that way. He's not calling them incumbents. He's saying like guys like ONeill and Carlson know that they're coming in here to earn a job. And actually seeing from camp this week that both of those guys are sort of getting reps in center field, which is maybe another aspect of that competition, because if you wanted to theoretically leave a spot open for a Jordan Walker, it would probably be on one of the corners, right? And so if Ollie Marmol's going, if Walker's out there, he already said Newbar's playing, which is kind of interesting given that last year he was sort of not getting those opportunities in April and May. That's the one guy that Ollie Marmol has said, he's going to be part of our starting mixture. So you could kind of connect those dots to say, okay, Newt in one corner, Walker in the other. Maybe there's an opportunity where Carlson and ONeill have to sort of duke it out. So typically we think of competition in spring and we go, okay, that's fake. There really isn't. We know what's going to happen. At least so far, they're talking about it differently, which it kind of does sound the same when they say every year, oh, there's competition. No, there's not. But like they've been self-referential to that fact. Mozeliak even said, I know we say this every year, but here's why it could be different this time. So I don't know. Like, I do think you're not going to use the spring numbers in Grapefruit League. And like guys like ONeill aren't even going to be here. So I don't know how they're going to do that when he goes to play for Team Canada for a while. It is going to be a little bit different. But yeah, if you were looking to more of the same for the Cardinals, you feel like you can predict it. But maybe they'll surprise us this time. I would welcome that.
It is funny though, and you were there. I try to not just read all the comments, but I try to see the video because sometimes it's the way somebody says something.
Yeah.
You got to love the fact that for John Mozeliak to even mention Paul DeJong, he has to preface it in a way like he knows the joke is coming. And so you mentioned Newbar. I think it's the classic kind of old school baseball versus new school analytics. I'm very high on Newbar too, but I can understand why people are like, he had one good half. Did he hit 226? Whatever it was, I can't remember. But we're all going crazy over drive line numbers and these predictive stats, which I'm all about. But I can also understand why maybe we should pump the brakes because I feel like people think Lars Newbar is going to be Babe Ruth this year.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so don't anticipate an all-star season, although he could do that. But what I would say is, like, Lars Newbar sucked at the beginning of last season. He would tell you that. But also, he wasn't getting to play. The Corey Dickerson thing, they were trying to figure out how to divvy up that playing time. And there were multiple times where Lars Newbar was sent to Memphis because he was just riding the bench and wasn't doing anything in St. Louis, and he would do really well and come back up. Once they committed to start of really playing him every day, the numbers got a lot better. He was hitting like 150 for the longest time with an OPS below 600. He finished the year, I think this is right, I haven't looked for a while, but I kind of have committed it to memory. I believe 788 was his season-long OPS. That's one of the higher marks on the team, and it includes all of those bad games from the beginning of the year. So, I don't know. I feel like he's not going to be maybe a batting average guy. If he is, look out, because what he will do is hit the ball hard. That's the drive line stuff. He's going to hit doubles. He's going to run into his home runs, and that could make him that kind of 240, 250 hitter who takes his walks, gets on base like 330, 340, but then is slugging close to 500 to where you could look up and go, oh, Lars Newbar is an 830 OPS. That is closing in on all-star territory with good defense that he's probably going to play in right field. So, yes, pump the brakes, I guess, unless you're realistic about the way he could basically replicate what he did last year. Like, he doesn't have to do a lot more cumulatively. You just would hope it's a little bit more balanced out. Don't be really bad and then be incredible. Just sort of stagger it throughout the year where you're a little more consistent. If he finds that consistency, there's no reason he can't be one of the Cardinals' better hitters on the team.
Well, folks, if you're still watching, we appreciate it. Please comment, like, and subscribe. We got to wrap this up, not because I want to, Brenden, because I got to pick my kids up. And I know you had kid issues, right?
I know that life now. I know that life now, so I can respect that. It's all good.
Well, I appreciate this. Brenden Schaeffer, of course, of KMOV and The Big Show on KTGR. Let's do this. Let's do this at least once a month during the season. Or, you know what? If everybody watches this video and it gets tons of views, and we make a couple bucks, hey, we could do it weekly. What do you think?
I'd be happy to do that because we didn't really get to talk for 30 minutes about Paul DeJong yet, but that's coming. Like, that's definitely on the way. I know the people are excited.
Well, okay. I do have 2 more minutes. I feel bad because as I made my joke about Paul DeJong, it seemed like you did want to say something. So go ahead.
No, it was very similar with him where the Cardinals have said, like, I know what you're thinking. Even Ollie said it at winter warmup. He's like, I know what you're thinking about Paul DeJong. But this time, I really do think the changes he made to his swing, basically getting rid of the leg kick, he's like, I think these could actually help him. And so I asked Ollie, I'm like, so, like, what about all the other changes? He's basically like, well, those weren't real. Like, and I even asked Paul DeJong, and he's like, yeah, I tried to make those changes in the past, but I really wasn't committed to it, and nothing actually changed. So I guess that's some good self-evaluation by Paulie. I did see that he took somebody deep today in spring camp and live BP. So you never know. Maybe it works out for Paul DeJong. We'll talk about him more if he's tearing up Grapefruit League, though. That's for sure.
I love it. I'm rooting for him.
I am too. Like, no doubt.
I love Cardinal fans, but when they complain about somebody a lot, which they should, because you can complain about Paul DeJong, but I like when the guy comes back and kind of sticks it to him a little bit.
Yeah, and he's the kind of guy that you root for too. He's not a bad guy. He's just struggled at baseball the last couple of years, but you've seen him do it before where he's been a power bat that plays good defense. And so maybe this time where it's like he knows he's not being talked about in those group of like bounce back players, like the outfielders that we're saying, oh, they've got to bounce back. He's just like an afterthought. He kind of probably knows it, but that doesn't mean he can't commit to the changes that he made and allow the results to happen thereafter.
And Brenden, you, of course, and we've done some brilliant radio together in the past, the midday grind. So I don't know how to end a show.
Yep.
I end the show 3 different times.
Yep.
We go 10 minutes longer after the fact because it's so much fun talking with you, buddy. So appreciate it. Thank you very much. Again, comment, like, subscribe. Check out Brenden, KMOV, The Big Show, of course, KTGR. Thank you very much, buddy. We'll do it again soon.
Very soon. I'm looking forward to it.